This is great of Galvanize and Boulder Startup Week to put together. This is what let's see if my slides will come up here. Yeah, so this is getting back to work, and I put an exclamation point on there, and then post COVID-19. And I'm also going to try something kind of new with this presentation, which is I'm going to kind of go back and forth a little bit. And I'm going to go back and forth so that we can kind of make this a little bit more personal. And I only have, I think, 12 slides. So it's not whatever, not that big a deal. In any case, this is getting back to work, and then we'll see if this will forward. I didn't even try the forwarding. That's funny. There we go. So I've been, over the past 2 weeks, interviewing 28 business leaders in 15 different business verticals, all the way from kind of, I would say, mid-stage startups, so Series A startup, to Fortune companies. I think we got 2 startup teams on the phone, and the Fortune teams were 3 individuals. I personally held 22 of the interviews, and I got 6 more from another human-centered designer last night. So that's that. This is the long-form conversation, which, if you're familiar with human-centered design, we use this to kind of get the zeitgeist of the market in current time. These were the 4 questions that I asked. How are you doing? What is your plan for getting back to work? How are you communicating with your customers, clients, and vendors? And what opportunities do you see moving forward? And so those were standard questions for 28 different conversations, and the results are as follows. Let's move forward again. Oh, first, I'm Brian. And so I'm Brian, and I run Rebel Consultants. We are in Boulder with a small contingent in San Francisco and one overseas at the moment. And the Rebel has been in the human-centered design, or if you prefer, design thinking world, for 20 years. We've had some really good successes in the marketplace, and of course, we've sort of developed our own protocols. So you just saw a piece of that, the long-form conversation, to get the zeitgeist, right? That's something that we invented maybe 7 or 8 years ago when we started doing really heavy consumer research. But usually we do design, research, and then design, following a very strict human-centered protocol. Some of our clients over the years include auto companies, consumer electronics and retail companies, big properties online and in ATG Oracle. That's a ERP system for software. I guess I had a lot of retail customers, app spaces, and then media, right? So and banking. We do quite a bit in banking, and so this is kind of the Rebel modus operandi, is to go in human-centered design for software, automotive, and consumer tech. So I think we have about 60 products in the marketplace when you take the digital products plus the consumer electronics products. The major themes that we discovered when we were talking to folks, and this is really interesting. So again, we just do this thing where, we have this idea that people are going to talk to us and build on those questions. And that's exactly what we did. And it was really, really fun, because we saw a huge gamut of responses to those 4 questions that I put together. And it was really, really interesting to hear everybody's comments. And 4 or 5 themes kind of showed up. These were the themes of the conversations that were led from the people we were talking to, right? And that's really important. So they included the state of the state. What I mean by that is how they're doing now, right? What their plan for business is. And then their customers, clients, and vendors. Everybody wanted to talk about customers, clients, and vendors. Risk mitigation was a big thing, which we didn't see coming into play that much when we started the conversation, but certainly it's been really a big topic of conversation in business. And then opportunities moving forward. So those are the 5 things I'm going to discuss right now and talk about, even what some individuals said, while not revealing any names. First, let's cover the state of the state. And this is the USA. I did talk to a couple people in Hong Kong, and that is not something that they have a very different perspective.
Brian, I want to pause you for 1 second. I've got some feedback about seeing a gray screen when you're in presentation mode. So I just want to make sure, I want to just reach out to everybody out in Zoom land. If you could do me a favor and let me know if you are seeing his presentation. Let's do that. Someone mentioned a gray screen, so I want to make sure. Okay, so some people can see it and some people can see the presentation. Okay, cool. So I'll troubleshoot with the person that reached out directly. Go for it. Keep going. Thank you.
No, keep interrupting. It gives me a little chance to breathe, and I started going too quickly there. So
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
So state of the state, again, USA currently. This is really a big issue. This is not, and I did run across some other folks that were talking about how this wasn't a very big issue. This is the largest governmental action in the history of mankind, as well as the largest economic shutdown in the history of mankind. So there is make no mistake, this is a really, really big deal. And it's going to affect all of us for years to come. The second thing was that there's a general fear and anger amongst the people that I spoke with. The fear piece was about 2/3 of the people we talked to, and anger about 1/4. The fear expressed was about work, which was super interesting, not about COVID-19. I think we've become, we're at week 7 in most places for lockdown, somewhere in there. And it's interesting that people have taken the safety precautions and they feel safe personally, but they're very worried about their businesses. And I spoke to 3 pragmatists, which would be, roughly 10% of the people we talked to, and they're doing great. A couple of them were in the natural foods business and one in grocery. So they're doing very, very well, and they're not so worried. They don't have that fear or anger. The anger was mostly directed at governmental action, and that was also super interesting too. It was surprising that went down the middle. It wasn't all conservatives or it wasn't all Democrats who were necessarily angry. It kind of ran down the middle. The next state of the state thing is that all business leaders had gratitude for others. This was a really cool theme to discover. The idea of, I think I shared with Katie the other day, but I went to my first dinner party held by a restaurateur here in Colorado, and there were 20 people there, a couple people over 20, and we ran the gamut from like 40 years old to 78 years old. And it was really interesting because they were very thankful to the millennials and the Gen Zers for actually doing the lockdown stuff. And we did hear that from everybody we spoke with. The gratitude piece was a big deal to people. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we move forward here. But that was a very good constant to discover. And then everybody was also very politically charged. This is something that, I was purposely not going after the politics of people, despite me spending a lot of my time discussing politics. That wasn't my goal here. And yet everyone brought it up. And that was really, really interesting. And of course, I did push a little bit when somebody brought it up. I would, the art of a long form interview is to encourage your subjects to continue talking. And so I would just agree with whatever they said and then hear their complaints about the other side. There's a huge identity with tribe in the United States. It's not like this is new, but it is being strengthened by COVID-19, and a huge level of impatience with anyone who's on the other side. This is kind of new for Americans. I think it's been building for several decades, but it is kind of surprising to hear from folks. And it is really magnified during COVID-19. So that's the state of the state. That's the first of our 5 discoveries on this thing. The second one is plans for business. And I know business plans used to be a thing we all made, but we don't anymore. So just plans for business is what this is supposed to say. There's a recognition that business as usual will not return, and that's something that people are kind of sharing and goes beyond the personal stuff. A lot of things are going to end in just our personal behaviors. I kind of hope that movies don't go away. I like to go to the movies. But public nose picking, that is now out. We're not supposed to do that at all anymore. And for those of you who think that you're privately picking your nose when you're in your car, you're really not. I sit on my deck a lot and I watch people drive by. It's no good. You just stop doing that. In any case, those kind of things. Or you know what else I don't like is when you lick your fingers and then thumb through some pages and hand it to somebody. I've never liked that, but those things will change pretty soon. Like those things will change immediately, but we're going to see that regular business as well is just not going to return. There won't be a normal anymore. We're going to invent the normal. There's a real apprehension about getting back to work. This is because there's so much uncertainty. I talk to people, like I said, in 14 different verticals, business verticals, and probably about 9 or 10 states, I would say. And none of those states have a plan. It's including the one I'm in now. It's one of those things where, you know, we're really kind of most of us are liking what our leaders are doing, I think, but there's no real plan. And that's very apparent, and business leaders are very, very cognizant of that lack of plan. All roles and vendors will be reviewed for ROI. This is something that every worker should be prepared for. In fact, I would go ahead and type up why you're important to your organization, and I would do that all the way to the executive level right now. There's really no, you need to justify how much money you're making, and that's because a lot of people are going to enter the job market, and a lot of people are, and especially for you freelancers or vendors to larger companies, you're going to see a lot of competition in the next 6 months. Those people that didn't have work are going to actually cause some trouble for the rest of us. They'll pretend that they have, you know, expertise, and it's our job as professionals in what we do to kind of maintain our space, if you will, if that makes any sense. And then innovation is being embraced. This is something that I think there's going to be great money in the near term. And by near term, I think the next month or so. And I think after that, when people get back to work, and I know Tommy's on the call, he's the CEO of Innovators Colorado. And it's really an interesting, a really interesting time to watch people just kind of do innovation or conduct innovative practices out of sheer necessity and them actually liking it. But as soon as we get back to work and people go back to their offices, they will forget. So if you sell innovation, I've been selling innovation for 13 or 14 years. So that is something you need to sell right now. That's not something that you can wait a couple months for because they'll actually forget. They will be so busy with everything else and trying to make their own money that new initiatives probably won't be they won't be everywhere in any case. Customer messaging was another really important topic that all these business leaders had on top of mind. And this was super interesting too, because 1/4 of the business leaders had spoken with customers. And I put that stat in there as if it were a good thing. That's a horrible thing. When you see that only 1/4 of business leaders have spoken with their customers, yet they're very concerned about customer messaging, that means that they've spent the last several years or whatever just concentrating on marketing. And marketing is a great thing. Everybody needs to do marketing, but this is something where it's kind of a shame, especially for a human-centered designer, to see that people have been very light in talking to their customers. And I think that should increase. And I think it will out of necessity, because people are going to be stuck wondering where their customers went. They're going to be going to people who speak with them and know them really well. And they're tired of politics and the platitudes around it. This is a very serious time. And by that, I mean, you know, the idea of the politics discussion, if you're a vendor or you have clients, you know, maybe don't talk to those clients about politics. Now's not the time. If they bring it up, I would suggest that we, you know, just agree with them and hear their point of view. It's very serious to people, but the polarization is so great right now that it's not a time to take a stand. Do that in your private life. I would, and that idea is also good for the platitudes. And platitudes are, people that say something political somewhere and or a side note or something, or even in their signature line. I've gotten 2 signature lines. Stay safe is not something professionals want to see in an email signature. It's just, it seems a little trite at the moment. I heard that several times in talking to folks. The next one was 1/2 of business leaders are holding a firm position on pricing. And this, I think, is super cool because they, there have been a lot of little tricks, and it's really easy to see in the auto industry. But who wants to pay for a car for the next 84 months? But the pricing hasn't changed. And I think that that's a positive for the entire marketplace. Once people get a good footing under themselves, I think they'll be able to pay the real price. So I wouldn't mess with your pricing. This also goes for vendors and people who service larger companies. You can give a little bit more work for your current price, but I wouldn't lower your rates just yet. That may be another discussion in a month. There were a lot of companies that I think that I talked with 5 people who did try to adjust pricing, but they failed during the lockdown. So they didn't bring in more customers. And I think that's part of the reason so many people are staying firm. Risk mitigation was the 4th, I guess, thing that we talked about, or that they talked about. This one is interesting. Company survival is job 1, and customer care is paramount. Now, if you read between the lines here, they don't mention, actually nobody I mentioned had a peep about employees, and I was talking to people who are very empathetic people, and probably 10 of them are friends, and they don't usually have this attitude. But I think that, when you're in so much trouble or you're in a little peril, you don't really think about the people who work for you as much. And then the only time they brought up employees was kind of on the next thing that they wanted to discuss, which was legal ramifications of bringing employees back. This just is unknown right now, unless you're in a meatpacking plant in North Dakota where you're protected from legal ramifications. If I ask employees to come back, they may end up suing me if they get sick. So that's something that's on every business leader's mind at the moment. They're looking for kind of a balance between legal and human capital. And I think this is, going to continue for some time. This is going to redefine the workplace itself, most likely. And that struggle is going to go on for the next year or so. And here's the other not so good news about risk mitigation, is that a rainy day fund is planned by everyone. This is really something that every business leader seems to have noticed and is frustrated by, because they didn't have a lot of planned funds in the bank. I read one big article on Apple Computer every year about what moronic policies they have. So Apple doesn't need to sell another product ever again, and they can still operate at current capacity for 5 years. That they're feeling just fine, right? And the rest of the business leaders are not feeling just fine. So that is something that really kind of hit home with folks. And I think that this is going to mean that the cost savings discovered during COVID-19 will continue. And it probably also means that we're going to, lose a few people. I think that, like I said, I really think it's important to tell your employer or your clients, tell them about your value right now. And that's because this is something that they maybe aren't, you don't want to be left behind when these things start to happen. And it was on the top of everybody's mind. All right, so if we go back, we'll do the opportunities that people are seeing. And this is something that, again, I was just asking simple opportunities. I didn't even say, innovations or anything else. I just said, what opportunities are you seeing? And everybody talked about digitization, right? And people want more of this. They really like the idea of the productivity they've seen using teleconferencing, and just the ease of use when you can just type out a 5 item list, hand it to somebody, and it gets done. And I think that, knowledge workers in the United States have really stepped up during this time, and that a lot of these changes will remain. So if you've enjoyed staying home, you might get an opportunity to do that 3 days a week, but you might also get paid a little less. I don't know yet. Nobody would commit on that topic. Innovation is top of mind. All business leaders were open to new practices and new products. And I did a little research on this because I was so curious about how innovation happens after a big event, right? Steve Jobs came back to Apple in '97, I think, but they really got going when they launched iTunes. And iTunes happened right after 9/11. They're not the only company. Amazon had already launched consumer electronics, but that's when they started selling other products. So changes they made in the midst of crisis made some of the biggest companies in the world, right? Facebook started in 2004, I think, shortly after this, when people were really looking for community after 9/11. I think Pinterest was a year later. So it's not like we can't do well after a big crisis. In fact, we can do usually pretty well. And after the 2008 crisis, we got a lot of stuff. The entire internet changed because of what's that starts with it, that web building tool. What's it called, Katie?
The web building
WordPress,
tool. WordPress.
I lost it. I don't know why. And it's gotten so clunky now, but still, we almost doubled web pages just because of WordPress. There was also Airbnb and Venmo and cryptocurrency. I mean, we're talking about a lot of innovation after 2008. And money found its way into the hands of startups. And those, again, are some companies that have gotten really, really big after a crisis. And so that's very encouraging. And the business leaders realize that, and they are spending time on it. They're open to new products and practices, whether it's a service or a product, I don't think really matters. I don't know that they'll pay for this again after a month when things start getting going again, but right now they're all very open to it. A quarter of business leaders have an innovator's mindset. Again, I put this in, the positive light, but this is really a low number. As managers, I would suggest that in, the digital world, we should always be open to innovation at all times. And we should always try to foster it within our organizations. This is why I joined Colorado Innovators, because they're trying to get this idea into people's head, right? The innovator's mindset. This is a really important thing I think we need to concentrate on a little bit, and just a quarter of them is not necessarily good news. So that's kind of the 5 pillars that my interviewees, or subjects as we call them, brought up. The thoughts moving forward are, let the market decide on safety measures. People are not that concerned about safety measures. It's, as long as you wear a mask and people are comfortable, that's fine. I think a mistake here would be to go to the lowest common denominator. So if you have one employee that doesn't feel safe, maybe that employee should get a little extra treatment, but I wouldn't treat everybody as that employee insists on being treated. So I don't think the lowest common denominator here is a smart tack to take. The talk to and study your damn customers. This was an amazing thing. Guessing will fail. This is something that people do all the time, and you can tell when people are guessing, or if you have vendors coming to you, they'll use words like design sprints or the lean startup, or any of these kind of half-ass measures to really go out and talk to customers. Right now, competition will increase in the next 6 months like we haven't seen since digital started. And you need to know your customers better than anybody else on the planet. Of course, I'm a little biased here, but because we do that. But seriously, I think that now is the time to know your customers. And sell innovation at all price points. I've made this mistake in the past where I priced too high for our innovation platform. We are going to sell kind of a light version of that in the coming weeks. And we're selling innovation even in our auto program, which is, we put cameras in cars, and they sit in those cars for 2 months and we watch every vehicle interaction. But maybe it should just be 1 month for younger auto manufacturers like the Rivians of the world or whatever. So that's something that you can consider as well, is hitting those price points with innovation. Innovation could also mean a product that you have, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to start over or study innovation within a client's company, but maybe you can sell them your product because it's already innovative, and I think that's a big thing to consider as well. Sell digitization. Don't take shortcuts. Again, this is the know your damn customers business, right? So as somebody who's was practicing UX in the year 2001, this is something we take very, very seriously. And digitization, we've helped several hundred companies come online or build software to help their processes within their organizations. This also isn't a time to take shortcuts. The shortcuts there are already there. If you want to put up a user forum because you feel like your customers need to talk to one another, that's a done deal. You can buy a user forum for about $5 a month and it'll be hosted and everything else. So we shouldn't be in that sales business. Those are already there. This is new stuff, right? This is the truckers realizing that it takes an extra 25 minutes every time they stop their truck to load because of the safety precautions they're forced to take. We can digitize that and make that easier for them, right? And so that's stuff that we should concentrate on. Stay neutral on politics. Obviously, this is something that, if you're not neutral, just agree. That's what I would suggest, because people are getting a little militant about the politics, and that's a very serious thing. And be as professional as possible. I came up with this good phrase: gratitude without platitudes. That's what it should be. I think that's a pretty good thing. And by professional as possible, I mean, put a damn signature line on your phone when you answer emails. I don't know why people don't do this, but I have people always say, call me, and they'll email me, and then there's no phone number because it's an email, right? Simple stuff like that is going to separate the wheat from the chaff moving forward. If you have a deadline, meet it. All this simple stuff. There's not going to be a lot of room for not being a professional going forward. And fend off emerging competition. This is for anybody who's listening, because they'll be inexperienced. This did happen to us several times as the economy goes down, and we have people who are all of a sudden really great product designers or really great UXers, or I've built a lot of software, and they haven't done any of that. And we have a little awards page, and we just throw that to the client. We usually beat them at the bidding table. But this is a time where I think people are going to be paying for quality, and I think it's one of those things where we have to fend off competition. I had a partner once who said his favorite thing was, oh, let them go somewhere else. They'll be back in a year, because they didn't do a good job, especially when you have bad actors in the marketplace. And just to close, this is what I'm offering. I'll speak with anybody right now. I put this up on the website about 6 weeks ago. It has been really, really fun for me to have people call me if they're feeling a little bit lost, if they aren't sure if their company's even going to survive. I've fielded several of those calls. Digitization from a couple of Fortune companies, former clients have called. It's been really fun to talk to people and just work through their issues. And I'm doing that all for free, no pitching, no nothing, just for free. And then what we need at Rebel is auto manufacturer introductions, and there's money behind that. So if you know somebody and it leads to a sale, then you'll get not a small amount of money. And digitization leads. We really aren't the company that takes shortcuts. We follow strict human-centered design or UX practices. Next slide is thank you. I'm B. Baker at rebelconsultants.com, and you can check us out at rebelconsultants.com. And that's it. I think we're done. Oh, click to exit. There we go.
I love it. Thank you so much, Brian, for your time.
Sure.
Just a reminder for everybody, if you have a Q&A, go ahead and throw it into that Q&A box, and we will make sure to answer. We do have one already. John, yes, totally possible to get a recording. Boulder Startup Week will be posting all of these things, all these presentations that come up. So be sure to look on their YouTube page. If you are a Galvanize member, I will follow up via email with a link to the presentation as well. So cool. Thanks for tuning in. A question from Thomas Knoll. He says, thanks for the presentation, Brian. Why aren't people talking to their customers? What's getting in the way of people connecting to and learning more about how their customers are managing right now?
Are you putting me up for that?
I am, yeah. So why aren't people talking to their customers,
Yeah.
and what's getting in the way of connecting?
Hey, Tommy. So I'm not really sure. I think it's a the shelter at home thing is people are a little afraid. And I was talking to executives. Executives have less customer contact, which I think is ludicrous. They should be talking to customers a couple times a week. And a lot of people think they already know their customer. And I think that the idea of the customer is changing dramatically right now hasn't really sunk in yet. I think it will sink in, but the people that are late to that party and really interviewing their customers aren't gonna do well. I've seen, I had a little hardware startup for 3 years, and we did very well. But I would literally go down to the customer service center, and I would get on the phone once a day and handle one call. And that to me was the most valuable piece of. We came up with a bunch of programs out of that. We came up with we found a bunch of things that to improve out of that, of course, and certainly got a lot of praise for the product we were making, which was fun too. But it's really important that we stay connected to our customers.
Do you feel, just a follow-up question to that, Brian, do you feel like there's a timeliness in how quickly everything is changing now, and that some of us as customers don't know what the world is going to look like even in 6 months? So is there a time frame for businesses, or should it just be like a constant flow of questions and getting feedback and working on products? What does that process look like right now?
So I would say that the best way to do is put it on your calendar, right? And so I think that people should be talking to their customers, and like what we did today, or what I've done over the past 2 weeks, is take a snapshot, right? That zeitgeist of business right now today. And I talked to a lot of people and spent 25 hours on the phone, which is fine, but it's one of those things that you have to put the time into doing. And it doesn't necessarily, if you're in more of a space and you don't know how to get to your customers. So if you're in the consumer product world and you don't know how to get to your customers, then just study that segment. Do really, go look at the analytics on sales and what people need and what they don't need, and how stuff is selling differently. I've talked to 2 people in the natural foods business who, they haven't made any price adjustments yet, but maybe soy milk shouldn't be twice as expensive as regular milk, stuff like that. We'll see how that all shakes out, but that's something that is going to be fluid. And then were you talking about product development as well?
Yeah, so thinking about how if you start innovating a product now, that might change in 3 months, given where we stand as people, right? Like, I don't necessarily know what tomorrow brings even at this point. So how can I make a decision on a product right now? Are we anticipating that to look different in 3 to 6 months?
To some degree. So I think with consumer products, less so, right? If you're doing one-offs in the first place, then yes, this is a horrible market. You need to actually get the zeitgeist just right, and your manufacturing has to be right now, right? We've seen this in the mask business, right? It's amazing. The Boulder Masks, this little group, was started by one of my neighbor's friends, and she has got 3 people in her house with sewing machines that she bought, and they're making these masks. And that is something that people needed right now. And she jumped on it, and she's doing great. And that's wonderful. But I don't think most of the people I spoke with were really in that immediacy of product moment. And a lot of product is based on behavior. And it's pretty hard to change behavior unless you have a crisis like this, right? And so I think the product behavior isn't going to change that much, but the behaviors around work and all the digitization, all that kind of stuff is what we've already seen change, and I think that will stick.
And then we have a follow-up question from Trent. What companies are you watching for innovation?
Well, Rebel Consultants, I think, is a big one.
Yeah,
These
I mean,
people,
obviously.
yes, these people have gotten, we've redefined television and automotive and cell phones and but on e-commerce, that was a big one. I would look to companies themselves. So I think that the companies themselves are going to hire vendors to do the research to build the products, but I think they're going to be vendors. This is different in different industries. So pharmaceuticals, of course, has a long history of really successful incubators and incubation. And I think that you're going to see, but they're one of the few that does that really well. I think on the consumer side, we're going to see innovation in safety gear and things like that. Education is just wide open. I mean, education, and I'm not talking about K through 12. They all bought existing practices, but universities need to make their own platforms, and that's going to be a very, very big space. Medical records and all that kind of stuff, that's all going to change. HMOs and PPOs are going to realize that digitization, it makes office visits a lot easier. It's, telemed is going to go huge. I think that a lot of that is going to change. A lot of it will be hit and miss if you don't know your customer, right? So if you just, and I can use surgery as an example. We've made 3 surgical tools, and the tools that were made before we were hired were done in a closed system in very expensive product design shops that concentrate on medical. And then the companies that wanted to make them got so frustrated they called us, and we went and watched people use the tools, right? And it's pretty gross to watch surgery after surgery after surgery when you're right on top of an open body, but it was worth it because we understood how those tools needed to be used. And I think that when people get that, I think this might be a really good opportunity for human-centered design, which I'm the biggest advocate of. I'm 300 plus clients in, and human-centered design is the end all. When you know your customer better than anybody else in the world, it's really hard to fail. I guess that's what I like to say. So that's where we'll see innovation within the companies.
Do you have any, for someone that maybe hasn't had an opportunity or made an opportunity for themselves to speak with their customer before, how does somebody get started? What's
just
that?
call. Just make a random call. Just make a random call. I'm not kidding. Like it's just start, right? If you are in an executive position and you haven't spoken to your customer before, or you're just I did speak with 2 people out of automotive, and they have a whole separate department for talking to their customers. And it's not human-centered design, by the way. So it's but the CEO of Ford should be calling a random Ford buyer. I mean, that should happen once a week. I think Mr. Collins talks about that in Good to Great, which is that the closer you are to them, the more you're able to serve them. And that's something that's really important. And I think that's going to get amplified. And then the cascade of human-centered design, right? But that amplification of customer needs in tight times, and the next year, 2 years are going to be tight times. So let's innovate, let's make sure we do it right, and let's talk to our customers.
Any other questions from the audience? No.
No more questions?
I know. I mean, I feel like I could talk forever and ever, but that's not the point here.
Yeah. But maybe this audience is very lazy. I don't know.
Maybe we should survey them.
Well, I can talk about surveys for days. We don't really do surveys that much. So like I have rules around the long form conversation. I'd say if you're doing an online survey to understand your customers, you should just sell the business now. I mean, you should just call it even, get out of there. This is no way to do it. I mean, think about the last election we had. Polls are just surveys. How many were right? Like I'm so glad, just because of that, I'm happy that Trump won, because I can say, this is how bad surveys are. And so you can get really false positives and false negatives on surveys. So you have to be very careful with what you're doing. I'd love if somebody from SurveyMonkey or Survey Gizmo called me and you want to argue about that, because it's happened several times. I've never lost. I'm good with that.
Karen, thanks.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
hopping in with a Q&A. She asks, is there such a thing as a user research boot camp? I was out of the UX space for 10 years and want to get back in.
I don't know. I think that universities have just started offering them. There are, 10 years ago, there were 20 programs around the world in high-end universities for this. Now there are about 250, which is great. What I recommend to people is go to Amazon and buy any anthropology field guide or ethnography field guide. Those two words, anthropology and ethnography, is the study that we undertake. If you read through the comments on, and I don't recommend any particular books because I love pieces of several, but look for a section on bias, right? Because bias is a really big deal. So as the manager of people who are conducting anthropological or ethnographic research, my big job is to do a little research myself, but then also manage their biases. Having coffee with a woman later today who's a wonderful researcher, and she and I had gone to 5 or 6 banks together to study folks, and she has a Series 7 and all that kind of stuff, and she's been in banking for a long time. So to remove those biases and just see the human behavior takes a little bit of effort, and a lot of those books will cover that. So that's what I would recommend.
Are there any initial, when you start asking your customer, are there any initial questions that you lead with? Is it that 5 question zeitgeist that you posted earlier? Is there something a little bit more specific that you should think about for your business? How does that process look for you to get started?
Well, it depends on whether you're after a product, right? You're after a product assessment, or you're after a service assessment. Those are very different things, but I would spend a considerable amount of time thinking about the questions you're going to ask, and then letting your customer lead, right? Letting your customer lead the conversation. If you don't want to have conversations where people are just complaining to you, right? So you want to get, and you don't want product improvement suggestions, because this is just one person. And as a designer, we never build for one person, right? We have to validate our findings. So if one person says, my hand doesn't fit around that thing that you're making, that's just one person. And that one person may be 6'5" and giant hands, right? And so we have to validate that comment from him. So that's kind of what that human-centered design piece is all about. I think the most important thing is not to take shortcuts with that. I think that a lot of people are going to be faced with the realization that by taking shortcuts and standing around a whiteboard with your other really smart executives and figuring out what people want and you're guessing, right? And in my world, we don't have to guess very often, because we will already know. And there's, I think Steve Jobs' last word was just one button. Like, he just wanted that one button, They said it was wow, but I think he said button. And so I think that was, he knew that people just wanted one button, right? That was something that he had researched for 3 years before he launched the iPhone. And that was the one big differentiator that has really helped them mainstay their position. Did that answer your question?
Just a button. I love it.
Yeah.
Just one button is the differentiator. Glenn Reese. Hi, Brian. Great talk. It feels like in-person interviews are so important to understanding your customer. With social distancing, are you implementing new techniques to know your customer?
Yes. Hi, Glenn. We are doing that, and it's been really interesting. The efficacy goes down when you're not in person. And I think that it's important to understand that a really good researcher, like a good anthropologist, will watch human behavior before asking any questions at all. So if I'm making a software suite, and I did this actually for a large company in teleconferencing about 4 years ago, and we watched people deliver webinars and watch webinars. We didn't say anything to them. We did not say, well, what do you think about X, Y, or Z? Or what do you think about, this or that or the other thing? And I love that particular story because we came up with the bio break button, because we realized that when people are giving a webinar, they often get stuck working their tails off 2 hours beforehand. It's usually in the morning at some time, and they've had 3 cups of coffee and they really have to go to the bathroom. But and the guy running the chat on this 1,000-person webinar is just going to be typing furiously for the next hour, but he really has to go to the bathroom. And you lose a lot of people when the chat isn't responded to. And so we added a bio break button. This is a higher end teleconferencing thing. They don't have a free version. And it's one of those things where, and it's used by the government mostly, but they added a bio break to that chat, guys. So, and people have no problem if it says taking a bio break back in 60 seconds. That's no big deal. And they stopped losing all those people in the webinars. But that was a behavioral thing that we witnessed. It was an observation of human movement and behavior. Only later did we ask the question, you really had to pee, huh? Right? That kind of thing.
Awesome. Well, we are running up at least on the Boulder Startup Week time. So if anybody has any last questions, again, this is recorded, so Boulder Startup Week will be posting it. And if you're a Galvanize member and I have your email, I'll be sending it out to you as well. Brian, thank you so very much for your time.
Oh, this was great fun. Katie, thanks to Galvanize and thanks to Boulder Startup Week. And please, everybody, I'm at bbaker@rebelconsultants.com. If you just want to talk about the COVID stuff and what your product is doing in the marketplace, let me know. I am available to everybody. So thanks a lot for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Have a lovely rest of your Tuesday. If you're in Boulder, enjoy the weather before it rains, and be well.
Signing off.